Ever since she was young, Emma had felt more at home in the pages of books than in the real world. She had always been a quiet girl, lost in her own thoughts and imagination. Emma had few friends, and those she did have were often just as introverted as she was. She spent most of her days reading, immersing herself in the worlds of her favorite authors. One day, as she was walking home from the Marigold Library, Emma felt a sudden hand clamp around her mouth. Before she could scream, she was thrown into a waiting van, the door slamming shut behind her. She could hear the sound of the van's engine revving as it sped away from the familiar streets of Marigold. Inside the van, Emma struggled against her bonds, but they were too tight. The windows were covered, and the van was soundproof, muffling her cries for help. She had no idea where she was being taken or why. As the van drove deeper into the woods, Emma's fear grew. She tried to make out any landmarks or signs, anything that could give her a clue to her location, but it was no use. It was as if they were in a different world altogether. Finally, the van came to a stop, and Emma was dragged out into the open air. She was thrown into a dark, damp room, the only light coming from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the corner of the room, she saw a man sitting in a chair, his face obscured by the shadows. The man spoke in a low, gravelly voice, promising to let Emma go if she followed his orders. She was to be his apprentice, learning the art of torture and murder from him. If she refused, she would suffer the same fate as his previous apprentices, a slow and painful death. Emma had no choice but to comply. She was taught the art of twisting a victim's mind, finding their deepest fears and using them against them. Together, they stalked the streets, looking for their next victim. One night, they came across a young woman walking alone. Emma was ordered to take her, and she did so without hesitation. They brought her back to the shack in the woods, where Emma was forced to watch as the man tortured and killed her. As the days turned into weeks, Emma grew increasingly unhinged. She began to enjoy the pain and suffering she inflicted on others, finding a sick pleasure in their screams. But the man was always watching, always reminding her that she was just a pawn in his twisted game. One night, as Emma lay in her cot, she heard a noise outside. She peeked through the window and saw a group of police officers, led by a man with a determined look on his face. Emma knew that this was her chance to escape. She made her way to the door, trying to avoid detection, but the man was waiting for her. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her back into the shack, locking the door behind them. Emma knew that her time was running out. She had to find a way to escape before the man killed her too. She waited until he was asleep, then crept up behind him and plunged a knife into his back. As the man lay dying, Emma ran out of the shack and into the woods. She eventually stumbled upon the police officers and collapsed, exhausted and covered in blood. The officers took her in, but Emma knew that she could never escape the horrors of her past. She would forever be haunted by the memories of the terrible things she had done, and the man who had forced her to do them. She would never be able to look at a book without thinking of the darkness that had been lurking inside her all along.